All right, let's go to this now. Unfortunately, a 14-year-old boy appears before the Children's Court in Waterfall, Limpopo. He stands accused of raping and impregnating his 13-year-old relative. Because both the accused and complainants are children, the case is being heard in the Children's Court. Let's speak now to Dr. Shaheda Omar from the Teddy Bear Clinic about this unfortunate, tragic circumstances that I think the family also find themselves in. I mean, Dr. Omar, this is quite a story to actually bear witness to as citizens of this country, but it's also not one that we are familiar with. What does it say again about child-on-child abuse?
I think what we need to realize that, as you have alluded to the fact that both of them are children, they fall under the age of majority. We're talking of a 14-year-old and a 13-year-old. Unfortunately, it is a tragedy, as you've described. And the reality is that one child has experienced an alleged sexual violation, which has resulted in a pregnancy, while the other child is alleged to have committed a serious sexual offense. I think the response here has to look at accountability, protection, rehabilitation, and prevention. But you asked a very important question about child-on-child sexual abuse. Now, we need to realize that this is not a unique phenomenon. We've been dealing with cases at the Teddy Bear Foundation since 2019, and there's been an increased incidence of this phenomenon. And one has to establish the different contributory or risk factors. A lot of the children come from backgrounds of adversity. So we're talking about the victimizers or the initiators of sexual violence. I do not feel comfortable with referring to a child as a sexual predator or perpetrator. These are initiators of sexual violence who have been exposed to adversity, whether it's domestic violence, a history of violence, history of victimization, sexual violation themselves, exposure or repeated exposure to sexual abuse material or pornography. So there are many risk factors that could contribute to it. However, this is a serious sexual offense and we cannot condone it, but we need to realize that according to the Children's Act, we have to treat these children as children and promote the best interest of the child. So for both children, the victim and the child who has initiated the sexual offense. And I think that is the point we have to address, that we are looking at how best to assist, intervene, protect, and prevent the recurrent behavior, because we do find that if children have not received adequate intervention or psychosocial support, they're likely to repeat such a sexual offense in the future.
Before we go into the detail, of course, as to how we can prevent things like this from happening in the future and what, government and other organizations can do to help prevent something like this from happening, let's talk about the details when it comes to a 14-year-old boy standing, in front of a judge. How does one even try and explain, to families of both of these children what is transpiring, and how does this actually look like in a court when it comes to children?
So it's important that we have to look at them as children, as you have emphasized, that these children would fall not only under the Children's Act, but the child initiating the sexual violation would fall under the Child Justice Act. And I think what's important to appreciate and recognize in the Child Justice Act is it's always looking at preventing the child from entering the criminal justice system and giving the child a second chance in life. So opportunity for intervention, rehabilitation, and reintegration. And of course, the levels of risk need to be established. That the child would have to be assessed. If it's a first offense, an isolated incident, and if there are mitigating circumstances that has contributed to this, the chances are likely that it's a low-risk case, which could then be provided with community-based intervention, meaning that the child could remain in the care of his or her family, so community-based support. But medium risk would also require a little bit more specialized intervention. With high-risk cases where there's multiple offenses and more risk factors than protective factors, that child would then have to go into an institution. So the courts are more lax and supportive towards children and treat children as children, not wanting to throw them into a cell, lock them up and detain them forever. It's all about rehabilitation, intervention, integration.
Very, very shortly and very lastly, this is, of course, one of those cases where we as South Africans ask ourselves the question, why is this happening, especially in our country? What do you think is contributing to cases like these, and how do we move forward from something like this?
So I think just quickly, you get your typical inappropriate behavior, which is, expected at certain stages and phases of development. Then you get the problematic behavior, which is, a boundary violation. Then you get the harmful sexual behavior, which is typical of what we are seeing. So the reality is that we need to create more interventions around awareness, not only awareness within families, schools, religious institutions, and communities. I think the reality is that we've got to identify the risk factors where it becomes a multidisciplinary, multi-societal response to preventing child sexual abuse. So, of course, your educational institutions play a huge role in terms of comprehensive sexuality education. But this is, again, a collective effort of the different tiers of society to ensure that children are informed, they are made aware of rights and responsibilities, the risks and the implications of their actions, where actions have consequences.
Thank you so much for your time, Shaheda Omar. Of course, always great to have you here and share your insights, especially when it comes to important cases like these from the Teddy Bear Clinic.